Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the Great Dynamics podcast. Today with me, I have a very special guest, somebody I've been trying to get on for a long time. Today with me is the one and only Ric Prado. Ric is a former paramilitary officer at the CIA. He worked pretty much his whole career in the CIA. Before that, he was a PJ, and he worked very interesting places, and he has a very interesting story. And I will let Ric introduce himself a bit more. Thank you for joining, Ric.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm glad we finally caught up with each other. Yeah, I end of my career, or my career was as an operations officer at CIA. Like you, I came to this country at the age of 10. I went straight to an orphanage because my parents couldn't get out, so they sent me out solo. And the reason I mention that is because I think that that's what began the forging of the path that God wanted me to go on. I went from an idyllic life in Cuba to had a horse and had bicycles and BB guns and everything else. And all of a sudden Castro takes over, confiscates my dad's little business and starts cracking down. So my parents took me out from there. And the orphanage was a rough start because obviously, nobody's happy at an orphanage. So
yeah, for sure.
It's kind of rough. But again, in retrospect, now when I look back, I think it's all part of the molding. Fast forward to high school, I had very good grades, but I had mischievous conduct. I was always getting in fights.
Yeah.
And but I outgrew that. And I joined Air Force Pararescue, which is part of our Special Operations Forces. We are the guys that go out and get somebody who's lost in the mountains or got ambushed and they're wounded. That is our job. We scuba stuff, we do parachute stuff, but primarily we're combat medics. And that was kind of like my back door to the CIA. When Reagan took over in 1981, I think it was, I had applied for the agency in late 1980, and they had given me some contract work, and they liked me and I liked them. But when Reagan came in and started the Contra program, was the Nicaraguans, freedom fighters that were trying to get back their country from communist Sandinistas. The agency had gone through such an attrition post-Vietnam War that, our paramilitary section did not have a single native Spanish-speaking guy that had military skills. So they hooked me up, and the rest is history. So that's my back door into CIA. Yeah. But I did 4.5 years there. So
fascinating. There's something that I would like to go back to because when I read your book, I was looking forward to reading about the missions, and because you're, I think, the first person who ever to write about your experiences as a paramilitary officer, as far as I know, or in this detail. But what I found fascinating when I opened the book, there was a section where you talk about leaving Cuba with the Peter Pan program, and you leave as I think a 10-year-old, where your parents are leading you to the airport, and then you just go into the unknown as that had me in tears, I would say, especially having a young son, but also because I experienced it myself. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how that had impacted you in life?
I was blessed with a father that was Mr. Cool. My dad was a cowboy, real cowboy, before he married mom. And he always brought me up to be the little man, how a man behaves, that what you got to do, you got to have a, stiff upper lip and all that good stuff. And, that trip to the airport is where the blur starts to kick in because, you are in total shock. Here I am, a 10-year-old, and my dad's telling me, I'm putting you to a plane to go to this place called the United States. I don't speak English. He doesn't speak English. And so, I was nervous, but I couldn't show it because I'm in front of my pops. I got to cowboy up. And my mom was crying. I mean, she was just bawling. And I looked at my dad and I said, she keeps crying like that, I ain't going. And I'll never forget it because my dad took a knee, got in front of me, put his head on my shoulder and says, I will see you again. That's all I needed. I knew he had to swim to the United States, he would do it. So, but again, just like in combat, there's the adrenaline and the shock. I remember going through the checkpoint where they're looking through my little bag. All I was allowed to carry was, about a 10-pound bag of clothing. And after that, it's all black. I have no recollection of getting on the aircraft, flying, landing. When I got to Miami Airport, that's when memories come back. And now there's a priest waiting for me and two other kids that were deplaning for the same Peter Pan program. So, I think that that kind of, seeing the violence that I saw early on in Cuba, going through something like this, flying solo as a 10-year-old and then ended up in an orphanage, I think that was the beginning of the forging of my mettle to be able to do the things I ended up doing.
I mean, did you know that growing up, or was that something you look back as an adult and say, probably that's the moment where you grew up so quickly in such a young age?
It is, and you know this from being in the business. When we're operational, it's like driving a car 100 miles an hour. You're seeing everything, but it's blur. Once you fire and you start thinking back, you start looking at details and realize there were things when I was writing the book that had me in tears a few times when I was trying to write them. They were a lot deeper emotional than I had ever allowed myself to register it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
for sure.
absolutely, yeah.
In your book, you talk a little bit about your mischievous streak, and I think that's something that I don't know if this is if you notice this, but this kind of like rebellious attitude generally goes a little bit against the grain. Somebody who wants to join a government agency, but in the role of the government agency that you joined, they like that rebel, can-do attitude that's a little bit different and going against the grain.
Yeah, and I'm very proud of that. I mean, the things that I was able to do for my agency were based on some very good mentoring from my bosses. But you have to have a certain character and fortitude and conviction. For me, the conviction is I saw what communism is. My wife is Cuban. She came from, she spent even more time than I did under Castro. So it's a family thing, my boys are former military. And for me, it was just, this was a passion. This was a mission. And I think that transference from being a street rat, getting in fights and stuff like that, to making a transition where now I'm going to be using that courage and that fortitude and that aggressiveness to something constructive. I think that was instrumental in my character developing the way it did.
In your book, you talk about as a kid reading about James Bond and these type of stories. And one thing that struck me when I was reading the book that I found fascinating. Could you talk a little bit about that first day that you walk into the headquarters at CIA and because that I found very fascinating how that was for you.
Yeah, that was it's like everything else. Everybody dreams of something. Some people want to be professional baseball players or senators or whatever it is. And I imagine they feel the same thing the first day they actually step into that role. I remember arriving at headquarters, and it was like I was walking on air. It was such a feeling of, oh my God, this is really finally happening. And I walked in through, back then it was the old headquarters building was the main entrance. And there's a big seal of the CIA in on the floor right in front of the door. And I remember that I circumvented the seal. I wouldn't step on it. And 24 years going in and out of that building, I never stepped on that seal. To me, I thought that was the stupidest place to put the agency seal, the foot of the door. But our lobby in the agency is magical because that's they have the impact. On the right, there's a wall with all the stars for agency officers who have perished, and many of them are still anonymous because they were that deep undercover kind of stuff. There are 141 stars. We are a tiny agency, and the operational component of our agency is maybe a quarter of what the agency is. Mm-hmm. So 141 is a substantial number. The real shocker here is that a third of that is post 9/11. You walk into that place, you look to the right. I knew about the stars. You go to that wall, and the cross is a Wild Bill Donovan, a statue of Wild Bill Donovan, the truth to set you free or whatever. And and it's just overwhelming. It's just like literally walking on air. Yeah. Great
Yeah,
experience.
amazing. And for people who don't know, Wild Bill Donovan was the founder of the OSS, the forebear of the CIA. Um, you show up. How is if you can talk about that, how is the process, the interviews? How does that go? And how does that go for you?
Well, in my case, it was very expedited because I've done some contract work with them before I had my clearances. I already had the polygraph and stuff. So when they called me in for full work, I wasn't in that building more than 10 days. I had no additional training. It was, get my alias docs. I went to the Contra thing as Alex Mendez. That was my
Mhm.
alias. And the Hondurans provided me backstop cover. So I had identification as a, Honduran Air Force intelligence major. So my period at headquarters was strictly several briefings, going through the medical checks, and get on a plane and go to Honduras.
Which is
And
crazy.
just straight there. Yeah, I mean, literally, I remember they called me on a Thursday. I was at headquarters on a Monday, and early the following week, I was on a plane to Honduras.
Wow. So, small question on this trip and this operation, but you're Cuban. Do they recognize the accent?
Yes, to a degree, if they're exposed to it. Most
Mhm.
of them are not. There were some that kind of looked funny at me, and I said, I studied abroad or something like that. So, and all the stuff. But I was in such a privileged position because
Mm.
I was the first guy, the first CIA officer to be able to visit the Contra camps, and there were 10 camps in the whole border area with Nicaragua. And border was very porous. Sometimes you were in Nicaragua, you didn't even know it. But I was, for the first 14 months of that program, I was the only agency officer to be there. So I was very well received by every camp because I was like Santa Claus. First I would bring in guns, and then I would bring in medical stuff, and then I would teach them the medical stuff, and then I would teach them how to use the guns, and get them food and get medical stuff in. So the accent was overlooked really quickly. Whoever this guy is,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, for sure. And I mean, I'm guessing 14 months you start speaking like the locals too. You
yeah,
picked it up
you
quick.
a little bit of the slang. I think that's the accent was my accent is my accent, but it's because it is a Cuban, very Cuban Spanish. But I think that learning certain words that they only use in that country, and there were several. At
Yeah,
first, once of them, I said, "What the hell is that?" Right?
yeah.
Uh, but I think that you add that to your repertoire, and it just helps you cover a little bit more.
I want to ask a little bit more about your time there, but just a quick step back. What makes Cuban Americans so, or I guess immigrants in general, makes them more patriotic than American born people?
We have something to compare it to.
Mm.
I think that the saddest thing in my country is that we don't know how good we have it.
Mm.
You know, Americans, when we travel overseas, we usually stay at the good hotels. It's usually on vacation or business. There's a big difference between that and actually living. And we take it for granted. I mean, for our kids, the iPad doesn't work is it's a first world problem. I mean,
Yeah.
they all unglued. So when you have lived communism and you see what it brings, and the atrocious behaviors and the abuses and the confiscation and the total control of a society, and then you come to the United States and you could stand on any street corner and say you like the president or not. You're free to speak. So I think that that's why immigrants writ large, especially those that come from more, because I was literally I was a refugee,
Mm.
because it was That's why I was under a refugee status. I had a refugee visa. But that is very notable. And if you see, look at South Florida, there's a lot of prominent Cubans there that are now senators and
Mhm.
congressmen and all this kind of stuff and going up and chiefs of police. So I think it gives you that contrast and you want to keep what you have and you're willing to fight.
Yeah. I think in your book, this is something I felt a lot too when growing up, is that you feel you owe a debt to the country that took you in. And yeah, that I found that resonated a lot with me, because obviously, even if the country doesn't know they did that for you, you feel it. And how much of that played a role in your career when you made these type of decisions?
Yeah, without a doubt. First of all, my father was very pro-American.
Mm.
When my dad, the majority of the Cubans that came the early years, and let's say from 62 when I came out to the mid 70s or a little bit longer, they came to the United States with the thought of returning to Cuba
Mm.
at some future time and go back, live there and get their homes and all that other stuff. And after about a year or two in the United States, my dad sat us down and says, "We're not going back. Even if the government changes, we will go back to visit, but I'm staying in this country." So my father and my mother and I, became residents the day we could become residents. We became citizens the day that we can be, could become citizens. And until he passed away at the age of 89, my dad never missed a voting opportunity. So that was my household, a Christian household, a freedom-loving household, and my parents both really were grateful to this country. I think you remember from the book that my big tipping point from being the street rat was my first semester in college.
Yeah.
And this was the hippie years. This is like 1971, 71. And the hippies had posted a sign that tomorrow we're going to take down the flag and burn it. And I said, no, they're not. But I didn't know anybody.
Mhm.
College, I had to get some of my high school friends to come to the college. And when the hippies came down, it was about 15 of them, and it was about 4 of us. And it wasn't a fair fight. But the funny thing is, when they ran off and there's beads on the floors and torn T-shirts and all this may sound melodramatic, but I looked up and I saw that flag. And I remember it was a cool day, so the sky was just clean blue. And that was the first time that I really felt proud of doing violence. 6 months later, I was in pararescue.
Crazy. I think, I mean, a lot of people, this is obviously right now, I'm not an American, so we're in, I think generally, but particularly in America, it's a very polarizing time right now. And something else that you mentioned that I find very fascinating is the role of communism and how communism played a part in world history. I think we kind of forgot, which is very similar to fascist movements that we forget very quickly. Obviously, the Contra years are controversial, but since you were in it, how for you being there, experiencing it, how was that like?
I had a blessed career. I don't think I ever had a bad job. So when people ask me, what is your favorite period or your favorite mission or whatever, it always goes back to those days. And there's several reasons. First of all, um, I am full of blessing that I was actually now a CIA operations guy, you know,
Mhm.
for the paramilitary side. Second, I was 30 years old and I am surrounded by mostly peasants that were fighting the same monster that destroyed my family. I helping and fighting alongside in a couple of incidents, these Contras, which for the greater majority were peasants.
Mm.
They did not know anything about Lenin or Marx. To them, it was they burned my church and beat up my priest. They raped my daughter. They force conscripted my 15-year-old son into the military. They were fighting for the family values and their religion. So for me to be in that position where I am bringing them the tools and teaching them the tools. Because for those 14 months, every training that they got, I had to give it to them. I would, back at base, I would practice and get tutorials on them. But when I was in the field, I was the only guy doing the training for those 14 months. And you figure I lived there for a little over 3 years, and I slept in a jungle hammock Monday through Friday for the greater majority of those 3 years. And I never once said, what am I doing here? On the contrary. So it was so rewarding to see and be able to help these guys, see the gratitude, because once you live through communism, you don't want anything to do with it. And look at, you mentioned historically and worldwide. Mention me a country that has thrived under communism and the people that have enjoyed the freedoms that a lot of others enjoy. That's what communism is. It's a totalitarian, not much different than the Nazis in World War II. It's total control. It's abuse of anybody that doesn't fit their mold, and that atrocities, again, is what makes us want to go and do something about it, and makes us appreciate good versus the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've had this discussion with friends a lot, and sometimes I walk around and I see a protest, and it's young people walking around with the hammer and the sickle flag, which I don't understand. I wonder if they understand it, but there's a freedom of expression, so everybody can say and do what they want in that regard. And I will definitely never walk with my political ideals on my sleeve. So that's irrelevant. I think it's a deeply personal thing. In your time in, let's say after, when you were done in Nicaragua, how does that look like? What is the step done next?
Yeah, I had 2 years of college, so I had to, in order to be a staff officer in the CIA, you have to have at least a 4-year degree. And I had good grades, but I only had about 2 years accumulated through time. So they sponsored me to finish those 2 years in a year. They gave me a year-ish, but that's all I did. So I spent a year, got my diploma from George Mason University. I was, graduated with distinction. I think I had 1B, the rest were A's. So it was a good focus thing. And from there, almost immediately, within a month or two, I was sent to the farm. The farm is the biggest kept secret that is not a secret. It's in every book. It's our
Every movie.
The town, everything. Everybody knows it's Virginia. But that I went to the farm, and it's a good 4 months of very realistic work and training, and you're living the role that you're going to be living constantly. Your security, and I did well in the course. I was in the top 3 of my class, and it was really a polishing thing for me. And luckily, when I was in high school, I worked at a men's haberdashery, a good men's store. So I knew how to dress. I knew how to dress correctly. But I was primarily a blunt object. And 3 years living in the jungles, my wife says I was even blunter. They were first mutton. Because, you're dealing with rough people every day, and you got to stand your ground, and you got to, but it was a polishing, because now I am being taught a craft that is a trade craft that is esoteric, is counterintuitive. It is. I have a saying: anybody that I've ever mentored, if it's easy, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
You're conducting a surveillance detection route, and it's easy, you screwed up. So there was a lot of learning, and I absorbed it. I loved it. Again, it was a passion. I think that all my classmates were pretty much of that ilk, and 3 of them to this day we're best friends, inner circle friends.
You passed that, and then what?
Yeah, then I was supposed to go to El Salvador, and I was thrilled about that, because again, that was things were happening there, and of course I had a wife and a baby, but they have good living conditions in the compounds and stuff like that. So at the last minute, the Latin America division chief called me in, and said, we need to change your assignment. I went, okay. He goes, we want you to go to Costa Rica and run the Southern Front for the Contras.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh my God, of course, for my family, it was fantastic because Costa Rica is a wonderful place.
Yeah, exactly.
But for us operationally, it was very, very restricted because whereas Endurance have really bought off on the program and were providing incredible amount of support. Of course, we were remunerating them and treating them also. Those were separate programs in thanks of the support that they were giving the Contra program. But the Costa Ricans were completely the opposite. They make themselves, they think of themselves as the Sweden of Latin America, neutral, and they're scared. They were definitely scared of the Sandinistas coming aggressively against them because they literally persecuted my guys in Costa Rica. The Contras were there. Remember, those guys in the South still needed to get training. They still needed, so it was an exfiltration, black air flights getting folks out so they could come back. And all this under the noses of the local services that were looking for our activities. So you go from a kind of a war-like existence for 3 years, and now you are working out of an embassy, coat and tie, carrying a gun, but you're there as a diplomat, and everything you're doing is clandestine. So again, it was like a mini resistance kind of thing, having a safe house that you could drop the person off, and then 2 days later, you get that little group over to a boat that's going to smuggle them to Honduras for training and then back. So that in itself was really a grooming of what I learned at the farm, which is always basics, of course. And, from your own experience, our careers are mostly on the job training.
Mm.
And you get X amount of training, that's your baseline. But what the agency does very well is we are assigned somebody who's more senior to help you along the way. Every time you're making a meeting, every time you're meeting somebody, every time you're coming up with a surveillance detection route. So that polishing was there, and I had that mentorship. Joe Fernandez was the chief of station, one of the best bosses and friend I ever had, and it was quite fun. Sometimes, often frustrating, but we got it done. We were successful in getting our guys in and out and resupplying our southern troops, which that was non-existent before I got there. They were not being able to successfully be resupplied.
Yeah. And then I think after, especially during the Cold War, I mean, you were like on the front lines of the paramilitary operations and covert action. I think if we jump a little bit through the 90s and 9/11 happens and you're smack dab in the middle of it again. How did you experience that, and how does the next day look like for you?
That is obviously an unforgettable day for many of us, but for me, it was even more poignant because I started the Bin Laden Task Force. I was the chief of station, an Alex station for the Bin Laden Task Force. So very early on, and this was 1996, I think it was, early 96, whatever, out there, 96, 97, that we started the task force. There was only 8 of us. Mike Scheuer was an analyst. He was the senior. He was the chief of station. I was the senior ops officer and the deputy chief of station. So I knew who Bin Laden was. I had tried to, I plan after plan after plan for capturing him or neutralizing him in some form. And, the administration at the time would not support it. They never allowed to support that. So fast forward to 2001, I just came back from a radical Muslim country in Africa as the chief of station. And I'm made the chief of operations at the Counterterrorist Center. I started that job in May of 2001. We were hearing all this chatter. We were seeing all these indications that we knew something was coming. We knew we were going to get hit. We didn't know where or when, but we had a pretty strong suspicion that it would be in the United States because the intel we were getting. And a few days before the actual attack, a lot of things went quiet. The couriers that we were following all over the world, all of a sudden communications, interchange really dropped. So we knew that it was fairly imminent. And when the first plane hit the building, I saw it live, not live on TV, because I was standing waiting for my boss to get off the phone, and he had a big TV on the outside. I'm watching the TV, and all of a sudden, breaking news, this happened, and you see a blur of a plane hitting the Twin Towers, and I said, "Whoa, that's that was like must be a big Cessna or something that lost control or something." And one of the things that I loved about the Counterterrorist Center, we have representatives from every federal agency, from diplomatic security to Secret Service to DEA, you name it, we have it, and of course the military components. And one of the guys we had was from the FAA, the aviation department. And he came over to me before the second plane hit, and he said, "Hey, Chief, we got a problem." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "There's 4 planes that has pushed the button on their transporter, and whatever they call it, and they're not answering our calls." Just as he finishes saying that, here comes the second plane and hits the Twin Towers. I remember the chief of staff for Copper Black, was my boss, was there, and I looked at him. I go, "First thing you do, get on the machine, get a cable out worldwide. First, hit every liaison, hit every asset. We need to find out who did this. Number 2, watch your 6, because this is not a lone wolf operation. This is something major. They're most likely going to try to go after us overseas also." For the next 3 days, I slept in my office. I showered in the locker room downstairs at the gym. I slept in a little air mattress by the side, because we were going 20 hours a day, getting 2 hours here, 2 hours there. And I wasn't alone. I mean, this was the whole center was when it happened. The other thing that is very memorable for us was the courage that my colleagues displayed when the Twin Towers were hit, and then the Pentagon was hit. There was that other plane that we didn't know where it was going. And they surmised that it would be the agency, because they hit the economic center, Twin Towers, New York City. They hit the military center, the Pentagon. What comes next? What makes sense for next? Utilize your intelligence service. One person once says, "Well, it could have been going to the Senate," and somebody else says, "Yeah, but what would have been the loss?" They would have made very little difference. But yeah, for me, the building was evacuated. The whole CIA, the director came on and says, evacuate the building, get your car. I would say that 80% of the men and women at the Counterterrorist Center stayed. Any of the ones that left, they went to get their kids and take them home, and they would come back to work. And my favorite anecdote, by far my favorite anecdote in the book, was that first night. It was like 8:00 at night, and the deputy chief of our Hezbollah branch was a female ops officer, very dear friend, and she was 8 months pregnant. And she was at the computer, and I walked up to her. I said, "Christy, what the hell are you doing here?" She goes, "Well, until today, Hezbollah had killed more Americans than anybody else, and we cannot rule out that they had something to do with this, and I'm here. I go, prove it." I'm going, "No, you're not." So I had one of my logs got brought her home, and to this day, every time she sees me, she says, "Every time my daughter has a birthday, I think of you and go, what was I thinking?" But the reason I mention that is that if your fervor for your love and country, God and country, is so strong that you can override the maternal instinct of taking care of your 8-month pregnant baby, that doesn't show conviction and a little bit of craziness, as you know, in our businesses. So I love that story, because I think that really, it shows the kind of colleagues that I work with, and is so contrary to what you read in cheap novels and what you read in or what you watch in Hollywood. That there's always the guys always see the stealing secrets or pushing drugs or some stupid stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a very, very important part. And again, we all know where we were at the day 9/11 happened.
One of the themes that comes up often when I speak to former agency people is this culture change after 9/11 and the like maybe away more from the traditional intelligence tradecraft and more towards the paramilitary focus. How did that impact you? Because you had a paramilitary background and that was your bread and butter. Did that you think help you also more, or is that something that you think is a good thing?
Absolutely. And the paramilitary side was always the smaller, the director of operations is it, although we're part of the director of operations, special activities division. And so we had the manpower, and our paramilitary officers have to be case officers. They have to be operations officers. They have to go through the farm. In the old days, you could be a paramilitary officer and never recruit or anything. All you did was train or go do an operation. That changed just about when I was getting in, and everybody in Special Activities Division had to at least go through the course, not necessarily take overseas assignments. So what happened come 9/11 was we were ready. I mean, the agency had gone very serious into counterterrorism in the late 80s. In 1986, one of my mentors and heroes, legendary Dewey Claridge, started the Counterterrorist Center. Before that, there was a smaller component of it, but he made it a center. This is when he started bringing in all federal agencies and analysts, everybody sitting together. So we had started taking terrorism seriously because we saw that it had gone from localized terrorism like Salvador and places in Latin America and places in Southeast Asia and this, that, and the other to an international terrorism phenomena of a lot of these people joining forces are being supplied and by similar supporters. So one of the things that I'm very proud of of that period for the agency is the fact that we were the first boots on the ground in Afghanistan. There's a movie, which is a fantastic movie. It's called 12 Strong. But unfortunately, in that movie, the agency, which is one of the pet peeves of mine, did not cooperate. They did not cooperate, which is stupid. Here you have something that is a known fact, a known event. How can you not honor your operations officers that sacrifice themselves out there? Well, in the movie, the CIA is represented by one guy on a dump bags full of money.
Yeah.
And the rest was, triple nickels SF guys. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of them. But that really got to me. But the bottom line is when that special forces teams were finally able to come in, it was my guys on the ground that were vectoring in the helicopters to land the plane, and then they were joint at the hip for the remainder of the tour, working together. So I think that gave the paramilitary side of the house a lot of gravitas. You got the focus because, hey, you can't send somebody that's fresh out of college that just went through the farm and had one tour in Brussels or something to go to Afghanistan,
Yeah.
And I think that subsequently to that, as the world, the global war on terrorism exploded, more and more of the paramilitary officers were finding chief of station jobs and deputy chief of station, because now you have to send somebody out there that knew tradecraft, but also know how to protect your people and how to fight to survive in those arenas. So it was very, very important to that development. And one of the about 4 directors ago, it was a guy that did all his career in Special Activities Division. So that's how a boost that was to our careers.
Yeah. No, because I spoke to others where there might be where they were joining and they had an idea of what the CIA was, where the culture changed completely, like took that over. So that's one of the things that I don't think many people talk about or there's really written about. One of the things that I saw also in your book that you mentioned was very legendary person, I think, in the special operations community, Billy Waugh. Can you tell a bit about him? Because I think he's a very interesting character.
Definitely the most interesting man in the world, not that guy that sells the beer. Billy was a very dear friend of mine. We became friends in 1990, and we just hit it off, and we just clicked for whatever reasons, you know. And but Billy was a Green Beret legend in Vietnam. He did the first free fall parachuting insertion into North Vietnam to kill some, you know, generals, North Viet Cong generals. He's got 8 Purple Hearts. I mean, he was just a legendary guy. And when he retired from the Special Forces, he came to CIA as a paramilitary officer, but as a contractor, because he was too old to be a staff officer, and he wasn't going to go through the like that. But he was legendary in so many things, and one of the two biggest is that he was sent to Khartoum in the early 90s to put surveillance on Osama bin Laden. And the first live photograph that we got of bin Laden that wasn't from the press or something like that, Billy Waugh took from an abandoned building that overlooked this compound. And he had this big camera and was able to take pictures of bin Laden. Billy used to tell me all the time, he said, Rick, I got so close to him that I could have killed him with a pencil because, you know, he was in the white. He was that threatened. He was in Khartoum, which at the time was for terrorists. And that Khartoum, if you had money and you were running away from the law and you were a terrorist, you were welcome there. You had to pay dues, but nonetheless, you were welcome. So those guys were, you know, with impunity. So he had him very close surveillance. He kept proposing, you know, we could do this, we could do that, you know, and nobody was buying it. So fast forward to 1996 when we started the Laden Task Force, who was the first person I called? Billy. I said, Billy, we're going to take a whack out of this, you know, a lot harder. So he was kind of like my mentor on the whole things Sudanese and bin Laden. The other thing that Billy is legendary for is he is the guy who spotted and geolocated Carlos the Jackal, Elis Ramirez, the infamous Carlos the Jackal. And Billy, I've heard this story from him like at least 30 times. He says, yeah, shush, you know, we knew that, you know, that we got intelligence. I think it was from the Israelis. The Israelis had given us intelligence that they had heard that Carlos was in Khartoum. And lo and behold, through a demeanor hit, you know, the guy come out of a place, you know, here's a white guy, brusque looking, and he's doing one of these, and that caught Billy's attention, and he had the initiative to take photographs of the guy. He said, this guy's a player. I don't know who this guy is, but this guy is a player. And turns out that it was Carlos the Jackal. So he put him, you know, they had a surveillance team on him. Another good friend of mine was his partner on the surveillance there. And finally, they were able to find where he lived.
Yeah.
They traced him. He was at a hospital doing an operation. When he got out, we were able to follow him to the place where he was actually staying. Now, the problem for us was we did not have paper on Carlos the Jackal. He had never killed Americans. So we could not render him like we did Emil Kanzi and a couple of other those people that hurt us directly. So Kofor Black, who was the chief of station then in Khartoum, went to the French through the chief of station in France, which is another dear friend, you know, Dick Holm, another legendary guy. And the French came in, and Billy was able to say, okay, that's the house right there. And they had already come in and took him back to France, and he's still in jail there, and he will be for life. So Billy was always great in life. My wife adored him because we've spent a lot of time, you know, commingling. And I think the last thing that is when he was 72 years old, he went to Afghanistan with that team. where he was one of the first boots on the ground in Afghanistan. Shortly after the Green Berets landed, the next augmentation for the agency, he was on it. And he was 72 years old. And he fought for that because Kofor did not want to send him.
Yeah.
And we convinced Kofor that that was the right thing to do for a warrior. I'll end it with Kofor says to me, he says, he threw in my face that I made senior grade because he captured Carlos the Jackal. So I threw him out of office. And he's all, what's up? He goes, he wants to go to Afghanistan. I said, so let him. He goes, you think gets killed? I said, Kofor, if Billy goes to Afghanistan and he gets killed, the legend lives on. If Billy Waugh goes to Afghanistan and doesn't get killed, the legend lives on. That's all I know.
Yeah.
And that's but I'm a big fan, and we miss him terribly because we lost him a couple of years ago.
Yeah. But the picture of him in Afghanistan is iconic. One last thing before I ask you about some advices, what we always do in the podcast, is you mentioned this throughout your book, and something I've always found interesting and puzzling at times is in Hollywood, why do intelligence people always get such a negative, especially the CIA, get such a negative rep?
One thing that I've learned, because I've had a couple of people talk about making the book into a movie and all this other stuff. Not that it's going to happen, but I've been approached for it. And when they start describing the culture of making a film, you have to have somebody who's always the person that you want to die. That person, and within the good guys, the bad guys, yeah, everybody's got bad guys, but within the good guys, there has to be one or two bad guys that people go like, hope he's the one that gets killed next, kind of stuff. And I think that plays into the novels and to the Hollywood, is the fact that if you say, CIA officers are all college-educated, polished, former military guys who have wives and kids and go to church on Sunday, and then they carry espionage, people go, oh, boring. But you CIA guy who's really working with the Russians, or is a hitman and he's gone rogue and he started murdering people. If people, and one of the things that I try to interject in the book is the amount of oversight that we enjoy at the agency. And I use that word because we enjoy the oversight, because that's what keeps us out of trouble.
Yeah.
When people go, the Bay of Pigs, that was a screw up by the CIA. No, it was not. The original plan from the CIA would have worked. It was a political decision. So, in other words, we cannot do anything. We can do anything. Let's put it that way. That our president tells us that we can. It's called Title 50 authorities. Are the only agency in the United States that has Title 50 authorities, which means whatever the president tells you to do, you're allowed to do it outside of continental United States, of course.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, because that's something that's actually annoys me a little bit. But
yes,
for a lot of people that listen to this podcast, they are always asking me, or they're sending messages or to my team, and they're always looking for advice. So, I mean, your story is unique, and I don't think it's easy to replicate anybody's life in that regard. But if somebody would want to join what's now the Special Activities Center, or want to be a paramilitary officer, or even join the CIA or intelligence in general, what advice would you give them?
That's as I think I mentioned to you earlier, I do a lot of mentoring because I believe that we need to bring good blood into the building. We have three major components. Of course, we have security and all that other stuff, but the main components in the agency are the director of operations and the director of analysis. So you have analytical individuals, which is a different career field of the directorate of operations, and then what is now Special Activities Center. It was Special Activities Division when I was in, comes under the director of operations. So you have 3 or 4 different ways to get into different components, but the basics are, to be a staff officer in the agency, you have to have at least 4 years of college. So I always encourage young guys who are just getting into college that have this dream, make sure you get your degree. The second thing that is highly recommended is having a second language. We don't operate in the United States. English doesn't do us that good, and the Brits are and the Aussies are our allies. So, operationally, English is not a viable thing for us. So, somebody that wants to get into the agency should study a language and get a working level. And it doesn't matter what language it is, whether it's Spanish, which is fairly easy, French, which is a little harder. Russian is another one that's in vogue, and and of course there's Arabic and Chinese, but those are made covers. But the agency has a theory that if you have learned a second language, you can learn a third, fourth, and fifth. I actually had a 2 level in Japanese because I studied Japanese almost a year and a half. So that is part of the process. So language and foreign culture experience. Those individuals that, they go overseas and study at some school for 6 months or something, learn to live overseas. That's a big deal. Military background. So military service is huge. And what I try to explain to people that are trying to get in is you got to understand, for every one of you that applies, there's 100 that have already applied also. And I'll admit, a lot of them are kooks. We get, I don't know how they do it, but they do get a lot of people that when, as soon as they talk to them, they go, this is not who we want. They want to go in and kill people and all that kind of stuff. But you're comparing yourself with, that's your competition. What makes you stand? And what I do, when I mentor, what I tell them, I said, imagine you clone yourself. And the now you is this, but the later you is former military, college educated, you speak a foreign language, which the military can definitely provide. That makes you stand out from all the other good candidates who have college degrees but don't speak the language, have never done a job in their lives, much less done military. I think those are the biggest tipping points for the Directorate of Operations. The Directorate of Intelligence, which is our analytical component, that's a different breed. They're too smart. I mean, they're incredible. I've always always a big fan of our analysts because we can't do our work without them. Operators is red rag under the nose, go get the rabbit. These gals that read and study and go into depth and make a career of. There's people that have followed Hezbollah from GS7 to being senior officers of the agency kind of stuff. So, but for the paramilitary and for the regular operation, for the Directorate of Operations, those 4 things are big steps up for. And anytime that you can get, like for example, here in the States, our agencies, several of our agencies do internships where college kids can go in and do a month at FBI, a month at CIA, or something like that. And that's always recommended if you get that opportunity. But overseas experience, language, college degree, and military background are the 4 aces that you could have.
Now you are retired. What do you do now? What do you do? I read a little bit about you have a training company, I believe. So what are your activities now? Now you're done.
Yeah, I did have, I don't have it anymore because the book was successfully well received. New York Times bestseller, number 8 on the list. I'm proud of that. But I had a company called CampX. And if you know your OSS history, that's where the OSS started training in Canada because they couldn't do it in the United States. And CampX was just on the other side of the border. The Canadians allowed us to train our air. And we specialize in providing realistic firefighting to our special forces guys. So we've done everything from, French Canadians, Canadian SF to Green Berets and SEALs and pararescuemen and combat controllers. And, we did it all. But when I started writing the book, that was taking up a lot of my time. And writing the book was a challenge because I had to get it cleared by my agency. My book was fully cleared by them. Saw the redactions in there in many, many places. They still left more than I thought that they would. But the promotion of the book was the hardest work that you could, like I said, I've done about 140 interviews
Yeah.
between Fox News and CBS on the morning show and all these other things. So that's a full-time job.
Yeah.
I let go of I separated myself from CapEx. I kept the name because that was my company name. And I went into the promotion of the book full time. That was pretty much the promotion effort. After that, I had promised my wife that I was going to slow down. You know,
Is
she's
that possible?
it is. You just got to refocus your intentions. Obviously, I'm no longer that 30-year-old paramilitary Alex Mendez that jump upside down and all that kind of stuff. I am 70 years old, and luckily healthy and still fairly fit. But I had promised my wife that I was going to stop pretty much doing this kind of stuff. This old dog can still hunt. If my country was to call me tomorrow, I would not say no. I could never say no to this country. But I'm looking for anything. I ride horses. Right now, I'm in a cabin I have in the United States, and my neighbors is a horse farm, and I love horses, so I have a horse there for quite a while, and do hunting. We got grandkids that we get to spoil, travel, visiting family members, visiting friends. So pretty much slowing down. And other than the mentoring aspect that I do take very seriously, everything else is just fun with the family. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you deserve it. It's a long time coming, all right? Um, yeah. My last question for you is something that people always also are interested in and ask me about is there anything that you're reading yourself right now that you are watching that you find interesting? Any cultural recommendations that you can give?
Yeah, there's a lot of good books out there. Jack Carr is a very popular podcaster here. And he has I've done one interview with him and I'm doing another one in January. But Jack has a series of novels that they're fun to read and they're pretty realistic in the sense of the culture and this guy, of course, it's got his Hollywood stuff to it. But he just co-wrote a book called Beirut, and it is extremely well done. I did time in Beirut from the 2002, 2003. I was in and out of there doing work. So there's plenty of books out there that are serious. I mean, if you like, his novels for entertainment, that's fine. And you do learn some things, a lot about more the paramilitary side of operations, not the classical recruiting kind of stuff. But there's a lot of good factual books out there and historical books. But again, for people that are trying to get into the intelligence business, the one thing I should have added to that foursome is knowing what's going on in the world. You have to have very deep knowledge of what the Russians are doing, the Chinese, the Islamic radicals, what Iran is doing, what communists are doing writ large, and then the terrorism. You have to be aware. So getting good, unbiased news sources, which are hard to find, but they're out there. I highly recommend that they keep up on world affairs, and then history teaches things. If you look at historical books about OSS in the World War II, French resistance, all these kind of things and there are some serious CIA books out there that are not, Jason Bourne crap. I think that those are all give you an idea. I will tell you that I had no idea what I was getting into when I came into the, which was good and it was bad. It was good because, hey, nothing's off limits, man. I can do anything. But that's true. But later on, you understand, the price of compromise, the things that you have to do, the bureaucracy that is inherent in any organization, but especially one that has the oversight from Congress and the Senate on our affairs. It's a lot more sophisticated than just boom and bang stuff. So
Yeah, absolutely. Rick, thank you so much for this episode. I really appreciate you taking the time. And as you also mentioned, I'm really looking forward to talk to you for a while now, and I can highly recommend your book. Is there anywhere where people can find you that I can add to the podcast?
Yeah, if they go to my website, it's www.ricprado.com. That gives them a little bit of a taste of the book, a little backgrounder on me, and then at the bottom it has the different bookstores that they can order. But I mean, Amazon carries the book, and Barnes and Noble carries the book. It's done very well. I mean, it's sold 91,000 units so far, which is pretty.
Congrats.
And thank you. I'm very proud of that. And the majority are hardbacks, but there's really a good number of audiobooks that are sold. So it comes in audio, comes in hardback, and now paperback. Yeah.
I think we talked a little bit about this, but we have to organize this. But we wanted to give away some of your books, signed copies of them. And so for people listening, so that we will announce that soon. So don't worry about that. We've done that for other people that have come on, and I know your book will be very sought after. I know I want a signed copy. So, Ric, thank you so much again for your time and your insights and your patience. And yeah, hope to speak to you again soon.
It'd be my pleasure. Really is. I really enjoyed your interview.
Thank you.